My mom left our family home to the neighbor, and it tore us apart until I learned the truth. My mother was the kind of woman who taught me how to peel a lemon without wasting the zest, who labeled jars in the pantry with a handwriting that looked like a ribbon. She loved lists, recipe cards, and the small rituals that made a life feel boxed and known. Toward her last years, she had friends who sat on her porch and neighbors who drove her to the clinic when the weather turned mean. I think, in the end, she counted those afternoons and nights as a kind of currency, as valuable as any ledger. This is not a story about greed, exactly. It is about the messy arithmetic of love and absence, about how the simple act of being present can be mistaken for entitlement, and how a legal sentence can split a family into people who remember and people who measure. If you want a clean villain, there isn't one. There's just a woman who chose in a way that surprised us, and the ripple of that choice through 3 children and a neighborhood. So here's the history of how a clause in it will turn a lifetime of small mercies into the most public argument I've ever been part of. I'll start the reading, because that's where the geometry of our family first tilted. When a lawyer cleared his throat and said, "There's one clause I want you all to pay attention to," the living room shrank halfway between a familiar and a foreign set on a stage. We had assembled with that awkward civility people wear to funerals, small smiles, steady nods. But nothing prepares you for the way a sentence on paper can rearrange a life. The will was in a thin manila folder, its pages flipped with mechanical ease by someone who does this for a living. "We have accounted for the accounts, the cabin upstate, and other personal effects," he read. "And finally, the residence at 412 Willow Lane shall be conveyed to Ms. Eleanor Price, with a request that she continue to care for Marigold and tend the native garden as she always has." Eleanor, the woman who lived 3 houses down with a mailbox that always held a postcard, who'd once shown up with cottage cheese and an offer to sweep the porch when Mom was under the weather. The sentence landed like a thrown pebble in a quiet pond. Unexpected, immediate, and making concentric circles we could not ignore. Marcus made a sound like a snort, too loud to be casual. Jenna's face folded into something tight and hot. Aunt Lila, who'd flown in from Ohio, folded and refolded the tissue with a concentration that made it clear she was thinking out loud. I remember touching the banister and feeling the old splinter of memory. Dad's thumb that had left a darkened spot where he'd gripped too long. The spot near the kitchen sink where Mom always left her lemon-scented soap. "That's our house," Jenna said, the whisper barely holding together. "That's where we grew up." Possession makes a story simple. The house had been where we celebrated birthdays and did homework until the sun went down. It held our scratch table and the dent in the hallway where a bicycle had once scraped the plaster. But a will is not emotion, it is instruction. The paper named a neighbor as steward, not an heir, and that felt, in the rawness right after a person dies, like a form of betrayal. After everyone else left with lists of lawyers and receipts, I stayed. I wandered the rooms as if they might offer an explanation tucked into a drawer. The lemon polish Mom favored still smelled strong. A cookbook lay open to a page stained with decades of use. It was absurd, the way ordinary objects could be evidence and consolation at once. I knocked on Eleanor Price's door the next morning, not knowing whether I wanted proof or apology. She opened with Marigold curling against her ankles and offered tea without any triumph or reticence. "Your mother and I were friends a very long time," she said plainly. She asked me to keep the things she loved whole. The sentence was simple and not defensive. It didn't silence questions. Instead, it became the first clue, not of conspiracy, but of care. I left her house with more questions than answers, and the uneasy sense that whatever we chose next would be less about property and more about remembering who showed up when it mattered. Eleanor's kitchen smelled like lavender and old newspapers. She had a radio on a windowsill that played some soft old tune I couldn't place, and Marigold, our mother's cat, who had adopted anyone with a lap, blinked at me like she'd already decided I was allowed. Eleanor poured tea without a fuss, handed me a mug that was chipped at the rim, and sat down like she'd been waiting for this conversation all along. "You look tired," she said. "Sit. Tell me what they told you." I told her the legal words, conveyed, request, life tenancy, and she listened the way someone listens to weather, with the knowledge you can't change it, only respond. Then she leaned back and began to tell stories. Not conspiratorial ones, small, steady accounts of afternoons and small mercies. She called me one November and cried because the heat went out. Eleanor said, smiling at the memory. I drove over with a blanket and a thermos. She made me promise not to tell the kids she was calling me instead of you. She sipped her tea. We kept each other company. That's what friends do. Her calm made me more honest than I'd planned to be. But why the house? I asked. Why not leave it to us and set up some kind of caretaking arrangement? Eleanor's eyes shifted. For a second, she looked slower, like someone walking through rooms in her mind. She wanted it kept whole, she said simply. She was afraid of sell-offs and flippers. She wanted someone who would close the curtains the same way and plant the same perennials. She asked me because I was there for the nights when the rest of you weren't. The weren't landed like a pebble in my gut. It unrolled memories I hadn't wanted to touch. Marcus on his West Coast phone calls, Jenna buried under a marriage that had quietly required more of her than she could give, me trying to balance a job that felt like a second marriage. None of us had been neglectful on purpose, but none of us had been steady. Eleanor reached for a little notebook on the counter and opened it. I kept a list, she said. Not because I thought it would be evidence someday, but because when you're visiting someone who is older, the days run together. Dates help you remember. She showed me pages filled in a neat hand. Soup, clinic visit, took laundry, January 14th, brought lemon bars, March 3rd, sat with her for 2 hours. The notebook felt like an honest ledger. It was not dramatic. It didn't say, I coerced her, because there was nothing coercive about the entries. It said, repeatedly, that someone had arrived. I felt a prick of shame at the thought of trying to marshal legal language against that kind of presence. On the way back to the house, I passed the hydrangeas curled and blue like something that remembers drought. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalk, same neighbor we waved to who always walked a yappy terrier. But inside my mother's house, the air vibrated differently now. The quiet after a big thing had happened. That afternoon, alone in her bedroom, I started looking for anything that might explain her decision. I opened drawers, folded and refolded old tea towels, and finally found a shoebox taped under the bed. Inside were notebooks wrapped in a grocery bag, the kind with the store logo faded to a ghost. My hands shook as I unwrapped them. The journals were ordinary. Lined paper, ink smudges where a tear might have smeared a sentence, grocery lists tucked between entries about weather. But as I flipped through the most recent one, my mother's voice arrived in a way ears haven't heard since she left. Blunt, domestic, unbearably familiar. She asked me to choose peace over inheritance. I read in her neat cursive. I did not want my house to be a battleground. The sentence felt like a verdict and a benediction. I read on, hunched over the kitchen table as late lights sank across the lemon-scented counter. There were apologies to each of us in different tones. Not excuses, but explanations, and then a passage that stopped me cold. A list of small favors Eleanor had done, dates, and the kinds of details only someone present would remember. For the first time since the will had been read, the shape of Mom's choice felt less like betrayal and more like the closing of a circle only she could see. But here was the rub. Understanding her didn't make the legal fight easier. If anything, it made the next steps more complicated. Because the papers in Mom's handwriting were deliberate, and the presence documented in Eleanor's notebook was steady, and the three of us were left to decide whether we would honor that or tear at the seams. I knew then that bringing the journals to Jenna and Marcus would change the tenor of the fight. I could feel it in my bones. We were on the edge between reconciliation and ruin, and whichever way we stepped would decide how the rest of the story unfolded. I didn't sleep that night. The journals stayed on my kitchen counter, their spines stacked like a verdict waiting to be read aloud. I kept turning the top one over in my hands, wondering whether showing them to my siblings would soothe the storm or fuel it. By morning, the decision was made for me, Jenna called. Her voice was sharp, the way it gets when she's been stewing over something too long. Have you talked to Marcus? She asked. No. Well, he's talking to a lawyer. He says Eleanor manipulated Mom. I think he's right. I stared at the journals. It's not that simple. Of course it's simple, she shot back. Mom left the house to a neighbor she's known for what? 5 years? And not to her own kids? That's messed up. I told her about Eleanor's visits, about the grocery runs, about the little notebook. I didn't mention Mom's journals yet. Jenna scoffed. That's what neighbors do when they want something. You think she's the first lonely widow in history to get charmed into a friendship? Her words crawled under my skin. Maybe she was wrong, but maybe she was a little bit right, too. I said we should meet in person, all three of us. She agreed, reluctantly. By evening, we were at Mom's dining table. The smell of old wood and lemon cleaner was still there, like nothing had changed. Marcus arrived with a manila folder under his arm, the kind of folder that comes from a lawyer's desk. Jenna had her arms folded so tightly, I thought she might crack a rib. What's this about? Marcus asked, looking at me. I placed the shoebox in the center of the table, the journals inside. You should both see this before you make any more calls. Jenna opened one and flipped through it, her frown deepening. Marcus took another, reading silently for several minutes before setting it down. "She really wrote all this?" he asked finally. "She did," I said. "There's no sign of coercion. No hint that Eleanor pushed her into anything. If anything, it looks like Mom made this decision a long time ago, for her own reasons." Jenna closed her journal with a snap. "So that's it? We just give up?" "No," I said carefully. "We decide what we're actually fighting for. Are we trying to punish Eleanor, or are we just hurt that Mom didn't choose us?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus stared at the table. Jenna looked away, blinking too fast. In that silence, I realized something. This wasn't really about the house anymore. It was about every missed call, every skipped visit, every time Mom had quietly needed us and we'd been too busy, too far away, or too distracted to notice. The house was just the proof of it. And now, deciding whether to fight for it or let it go felt less like a legal choice and more like a test of who we were willing to be from here on out. When I left that night, the decision still wasn't made. But I could feel it coming, and I wasn't sure I was ready for whichever way it would break. 2 days later, I knocked on Eleanor's door again. She answered in a pale blue cardigan, Marigold trotting at her heels. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and something baking, which made it feel almost impossible to start the conversation I'd come for. "I need to ask you something," I said, standing just inside her doorway. She motioned me to sit. "Ask." I took a breath. "Why did she give you the house?" Eleanor didn't flinch. She sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. "Because she trusted me to keep it the way she loved it. And because she knew you and your siblings, you've got your own lives. Big ones, far away from here." "That's not." I stopped. It wasn't untrue. She glanced toward the window, where the garden was still holding on to the last stubborn blooms of late summer. "When your father passed, she came to me one morning, crying so hard she couldn't hold her tea. We started walking together every week after that. Sometimes she'd talk, sometimes not. But she told me once, this house is the last place I feel him." Eleanor's voice softened. I think she wanted someone to protect that feeling. I told her about Marcus and Jenna, about the lawyers, about how ugly things were getting. Eleanor sighed. "I'm sorry for that. I never asked for it. But she made me promise. She said you'd understand one day." The words lodged in me like a splinter, irritating because I wasn't sure if I did understand or if I desperately wanted to. When I left her house, I walked past our old porch and noticed something I'd missed before, a new coat of white paint on the railings. Fresh flowers in a box under the kitchen window. Someone, Eleanor, had been tending to the place as if it already belonged to her. It hurt, but it also made a strange kind of sense. That night, I opened another one of Mom's journals. This entry was from 3 years ago. "The kids are busy. I try not to mind. Eleanor came by today with soup when my arthritis was bad. She stayed until the rain stopped. I think she understands what I need without me asking." I closed the book, stared at the ceiling, and realized that if I kept reading, I might not like where it was leading. But I also knew I wouldn't be able to stop. The next morning, I spread all the journals out on my dining table. 10 of them, each with a different floral or pattern cover Mom must have picked up at the dollar store over the years. They looked almost cheerful, like they had no idea the kind of chaos they were about to cause. I decided to read them in order from oldest to newest. The first one was from 7 years ago, and it started innocently enough. Notes about her garden, what she cooked for dinner, a TV show she liked. But then just a few pages in, there was, "Met Eleanor today at the farmer's market. She insisted I take the last loaf of her zucchini bread. I think I've made a new friend." I kept reading. Over the months, Eleanor's name popped up more and more. Grocery trips, church bake sales, walks around the lake. She was there during storms, power outages, even a small kitchen fire that Mom described with exasperated humor. But the later journals told a different story, one where my siblings and I were fading into the background. Mom would mention our calls or visits, but they were short notes, wedged between longer passages about Eleanor. It wasn't malicious, but it was obvious where the emotional gravity had shifted. By the time I reached the final journal, written in the last year of her life, Eleanor had become almost a fixture in every entry. And then I found it. I've decided to leave the house to Eleanor. Not because I don't love the kids. I do, more than they'll ever know, but because I think they see it as just a building. Eleanor sees it as home. I hope they can forgive me for this. Or at least, not hate her. I closed the book slowly, my hands a little numb. I thought about Marcus's folder, Jenna's tight voice on the phone, Eleanor's cinnamon-scented kitchen. It was one thing to suspect this was Mom's independent choice. It was another to have it in her own handwriting, her reasons spelled out with painful clarity. That evening, I called Jenna and asked if she could come over. "Just you," I said. "I need to show you something." When she arrived, I handed her the final journal without saying a word. She read in silence, her expression shifting from skepticism to something like grief. When she was done, she didn't slam it shut like before. She just sat there, staring at the table. "So, she really meant it." "Yes," I said quietly. "She really did." We didn't talk much after that. But when Jenna left, she hugged me at the door. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall. Convincing Marcus to come over was harder. He'd stopped answering most of my calls, and when he finally picked up, his voice was clipped. "If this is about Eleanor, I don't want to hear it. It's about Mom," I said. Her words, not mine. "Just give me 15 minutes. There was a long pause, then a grudging fine. When he arrived, he didn't even take off his jacket. I handed him the same journal I'd shown Jenna, open to the entry about leaving the house to Eleanor. He read it faster than I expected. Too fast, I thought, until he got to the part about Eleanor sees it as home. His jaw tightened. "That's unbelievable," he muttered. "She's basically saying we didn't care." "That's not what she's saying." I told him carefully. "She's saying Eleanor saw it differently. That's all." Marcus shook his head, pacing. "Do you know how much that place is worth? It could change things for all of us. Jenna's got medical bills. I'm still paying off the business loan." "Marcus," I interrupted, "I think she knew all of that, and she still made this choice. You think I'm happy about it? I'm not. But I've read every single thing she wrote, and this was what she wanted." He slammed the journal shut. "Maybe you're fine letting some neighbor walk away with our inheritance, but I'm not." Something in me snapped. It wasn't our inheritance, Marcus. It was hers. She could have left it to Eleanor, the church, or the damn postman if she wanted. We don't get to rewrite her decision because it's inconvenient. He glared at me, and for a second I thought he might actually yell. Instead, he shoved the journal back at me and walked toward the door. "This isn't over," he said, without turning around. When the door closed, I just stood there, my pulse pounding. I thought maybe the journals would fix things, or at least make them understandable. But for Marcus, it seemed they'd done the opposite. Later that night, I got a text from Eleanor. I think Marcus came by. He didn't knock, just stood on the sidewalk for a while, then left. "Is he okay?" I didn't know how to answer that, so I just typed, "Working on it." 2 days later, I got a call from Mom's attorney. "I was going through some of your mother's papers again," he said, "and I found something you might want to see." It wasn't filed with the will, more of a personal note. I drove to his office immediately. The letter was in a plain, white envelope, my name scrawled across the front in her familiar cursive. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. "My dear, I know this will upset Marcus and Jenna. It might upset you too, but I'm asking you to help them understand. The house was never about the money for me. It was about the memories, the care, the laughter in those walls. And in these last years, Eleanor gave that to me when I couldn't give it to myself. You've always been the bridge in this family. Please be that bridge one more time. Love, Mom." I sat in the parking lot for a long time after reading it. Be the bridge. That sounded poetic when she wrote it, but in practice it meant walking across a very rickety structure with two people who'd rather burn it than cross. That evening, I invited Eleanor over for tea. I hadn't told her about the letter yet. I just wanted to see her face when I asked, "Do you know why Mom left you the house?" She looked startled. I thought maybe it was because she knew I'd keep it the way it was. Not flip it, not rent it out. She loved that place. She wrote a letter, I said. She said it was about the care you gave her. And she asked me to help Marcus and Jenna understand. Eleanor's eyes softened, but she shook her head. "I don't think they can understand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I have to try," I said. And that's when she told me something I hadn't expected. "Your mom She wanted to change the will years ago, but she didn't. She said she was afraid of hurting you all. It wasn't until last year, after that bad winter, that she finally called her lawyer. She didn't tell me until after it was done. I realized then that Mom hadn't just dropped a bomb on us after her death. She'd carried it, quietly, for years. And now, she'd left it in my lap, expecting me to defuse it without losing any fingers. The next day, I called a family meeting. I booked a quiet back room at a small cafe downtown, neutral ground, because there was no way I was hosting this at my place. Marcus arrived first, looking impatient, tapping at his phone. Jenna showed up a few minutes later, arms folded tight, her eyes scanning the room like she was walking into an ambush. I appreciate you both coming. I started, sitting opposite them. I found something you should see. I laid Mom's letter on the table. Jenna hesitated, but Marcus snatched it up and read it quickly, his brow furrowing. When he reached the end, he set it down and shook his head. So now we're supposed to just what? Hug it out? Pretend we're fine with this. Jenna didn't speak right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the paper, her lips pressed together. Finally, she said quietly, she asked you to be the bridge. Yeah, I said, and I'm trying. But I can't do it alone. Marcus leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. It's not about bridges. It's about fairness. She could have left Eleanor something without giving away the most valuable thing she owned. Jenna's voice wavered. Maybe we're not seeing what she saw. Maybe Eleanor really did give her more than we did in those last years. Marcus turned to her, incredulous. Are you seriously taking her side now? I'm taking Mom's side. Jenna shot back, surprising me. I was angry, but she was clear about what she wanted. That has to mean something. The tension between them was thick, like static before a storm. I leaned forward. Look, I'm not asking you to like it. I'm asking you to accept it. Fighting this in court will just drain us, financially and emotionally. It won't change the fact that she's gone. Marcus didn't respond right away. His jaw worked like he was chewing on the words. Then he stood abruptly. I need to think, he muttered and walked out. Jenna stayed behind. She didn't look at me, just stared at her coffee. He's not going to let this go, she said softly. I know, I replied. But maybe we can. She didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. That night, I got another text, this time from Marcus. If Eleanor wants to keep that house, she's going to have to talk to me directly. It didn't sound like a peace offering. It sounded like a challenge. Convincing Eleanor to meet Marcus was not easy. When I told her about his text, she let out a long sigh. If he just wants to yell at me, I don't see the point. He might surprise you, I said, though honestly, I didn't believe it. We agreed to meet at the house, Mom's house, because Eleanor insisted she wouldn't feel right confronting him anywhere else. If he's going to hear me out, she said, it should be here. This place is the reason we're even having this conversation. When Marcus arrived, he barely looked at me. His eyes went straight to Eleanor, his expression a mix of suspicion and restrained anger. So, he said, stepping inside, you're the reason I don't have my inheritance. Eleanor's shoulders straightened. I'm not the reason. Your mother made that decision. Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, right? And you didn't influence her at all? I didn't ask for this, Eleanor said firmly. She told me about the will only after she'd changed it. I didn't believe her at first. I even told her she should reconsider because I knew it would hurt you and Jenna. But she said it was what she wanted. Marcus paced the living room, his eyes scanning the familiar furniture. Do you have any idea how hard I worked for this family when Dad died? How many times I came here to fix things, to handle the paperwork, and she gives it all to a neighbor. Eleanor's voice softened. Marcus, I know you did a lot for her, but in those last years, it wasn't about repairs or bills. It was about company. She was lonely. She needed someone to talk to every day, to drive her to appointments, to make her laugh. That's what I could give her. For a moment, Marcus didn't speak. His pacing slowed, and his eyes landed on the old rocking chair by the window, Mom's favorite spot. I guess, he said finally, I didn't see how bad it had gotten for her. I thought she was fine. She didn't want you to worry, Eleanor replied. He looked at her, then at me. I still think this isn't fair, but I won't fight it. Not in court. That was the closest thing to a truce we were going to get. When Marcus left, Eleanor sank into the rocking chair. Your mom once told me, she said quietly, that family isn't just who you're related to. It's who shows up. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could all start showing up again. Weeks passed without another blow-up. Marcus stopped sending angry texts. Jenna, and I even had lunch without mentioning the will once. It wasn't perfect, but the storm had lost its edge. One Saturday, Eleanor invited me over. "I have something for you," she said on the phone, her voice oddly formal. When I arrived, she handed me a small, worn shoebox. "Your mom wanted you to have this," she said. "She gave it to me years ago, told me to keep it until everything's settled." Inside were dozens of handwritten letters, Mom's letters. Some to me, some to Marcus, some to Jenna, and one addressed simply to my children. I opened that one first. It wasn't long, barely a page, but it was Mom's voice, clear and steady, speaking across the gap of time. "By the time you read this, I hope you understand that the house was never the point. Things come and go. What matters is the life you build and the people you let into it." Eleanor reminded me of that when I needed it most. She gave me back my laughter. That's worth more than any property. I sat there, the paper trembling in my hands. Jenna's letter talked about how proud Mom was of her career. Marcus's letter was full of praise for his dependability and stubborn strength. Mine was about being the listener of the family, the one who could find the thread in a tangle of voices. When I finally looked up, Eleanor was watching me quietly. "I didn't show Marcus or Jenna yet," she said. "I thought maybe you'd want to." I did. Not right away, but when the time was right. That night, I called Jenna and Marcus and invited them over. We sat at my kitchen table, reading the letters together. There were tears, there were awkward laughs, but for the first time, the conversation wasn't about loss or resentment. The house still belonged to Eleanor. That wasn't going to change. But somehow, Mom had managed to give us something bigger, a reminder that her legacy wasn't locked behind four walls. It was in the way we carried each other forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real inheritance all along.